I'm Bill Siegel. We're talking about the ups and downs of Mexican half real collecting today. I've been collecting them for about 16 years, and over those 16 years the market has changed a bit. The thing that got me into collecting half reals is that you've got the same design features on the half real that you've got on the 8 real, but when you squeeze that onto a smaller planchet, the visual effect is very artistic. On an 8 real you get more white space in the fields. Here the fields are kind of compressed. It's just a very beautiful coin. And when you marry that with the fact that you have a large proportion of half reals that are available in very high grade, you can get over a period of time a very aesthetically appealing collection. So because of the beauty and the availability of high grade examples at, I must say, affordable prices, it's a very seductive series. It will draw you in. It'll give you a lot of pride in owning these little pieces of art. Like I say, there's many flashy examples. I will point out to you that on the earlier Mexico City half reals, if you're fortunate to get them in high grade, they have almost a sculpted appearance. You get a lot more detail, and for some reason in the feathers, you get a lot of times the Libertad showing up in the cap. In later years, they must not have engraved them with as much detail, and they must not have used enough pressure on the dies, because in later years, we'll see it in a little while, this is often, the lettering on the cap is often washed out. You'll get a flat chest, you'll show up a little bit of detail on the wings, but even in those later years, you'll have finer features on the feathers. They aren't as sculpted. So these early examples from Mexico City, if you're only going to collect one coin from each mint, I'd recommend collecting one of the earlier Mexico City examples, because it'll knock the socks off of non-collectors, because they won't know that the Mexico City coins are the most available. But it's definitely a beautiful run to collect. Here's an example of 1825 Mexico City. It's only an AU, and look again, even for an AU coin, how sculpted of an appearance that has. And from the population survey that I did over a 7-year period of time, my experience or my observation was that about 16% of all examples that I saw available in the market, and that was dealers' websites, ads in numismatic publications, eBay, and major auctions. Out of all of those, there were about 16%. And keep in mind that for the period where I was doing this survey, it was probably the first time in history where you could actually get a good read of the relative proportion of BUs to lower grades. Because never before were the lower grades publicly offered where you could view all of the offerings across the world. Thus, lower graded and lower valued half reals or of any series, they'd never be publicly available. They'd just be in dealers' books, and you'd never know about them. So you would have gotten a skewed view of the relative proportion of AU and BU examples had you done the survey in prior years when you didn't have the capability for the public to put low-grade, low-value coins up on auction at inexpensive prices. So I looked up NGC population survey, and out of 387 possible date, assay, or mint combinations, 135 of them have already been slabbed. It's getting to be where you almost don't have to put a lot of effort in a population survey like I did. All you do is nowadays, especially if you're a high-grade collector, only interested in high grade, just go out to the NGC site, because the data that they've got is pretty accurate. I mean, it's got its problems because of resubmissions and because they don't label varieties all the time, but some dates will have 10 MS graded examples, other dates will have 1 or 2. And even though there may be a little bit of differences in the way they keep their count, it still tells you, hey, this is a common coin in BU, and this one with 1 or 2, that's, you know, a rare coin in BU. So it tells you a lot of information despite the flaws of the NGC World Population Census. The reason that you can get so many coins in high grade is apparently, and I wasn't around to really hear all the stories, but apparently there was a good number of small hordes of Mexico City half reals that were found over the years. I don't suspect there were too many of them that were found in the last 15 years. But in order for there to be this many dates, actually all dates from Mexico City are available in AU or BU condition. So if you're looking to build just a high-grade set that would knock somebody's socks off, the set or the mint to do is Mexico City. They're all common, they won't cost you a fortune, but think of how few people would have the capability of doing that. If it became popular, you might only have 4 or 5 people in the world succeed in building AU, BU set from Mexico City, and that's the most common mint. But the reason they are relatively affordable now is for all of the attention in the Mexican area goes to 8 reals. And the minors in general tend to be overlooked, and as a result, if you're a minor collector, you pick up a lot of bargains. And in the process, because there's not too many people collecting them, sometimes you get lucky. And this is a Potosi half real. It's not BU, probably it's AU, but there were a few small hordes of Potosi half reals from about 1851 through, for sure, 1856. And how many would you say were in each date? Probably no more than 10, right?
Well, yeah, I would think not more than 10.
Yeah, and they all seemed to come on the market probably in the 90s because there was a couple collectors who were basically throwing them on the market about 15 years ago. But today, this is a real find. And if you're in there collecting consistently half reals, you're going to get fantastically lucky purchases because it's an area of opportunity. Now, I have to confess, this coin isn't mine, but there are wonder coins out there where you have high condition and extreme rarity. You know, if you are lucky enough to get a coin like this, that's a fortunate purchase. Because even one like this and very good is a rare coin. Sometimes rarity and high condition combine and fall into the hands of the lucky, fortunate collectors. Now, not everything is available in high grade. We're going to probably visit the 45 GAMC later when we talk about varieties. So it's not a boring date. It's just when you're used to looking at coins like this and you kind of got into it because of the easy availability of high-grade coins, after a while, you kind of hit the wall. So it's like an analogy. When you've dated Miss Mexico, Miss Average is no longer exciting. So what happened? And actually, Miss Average, this is above average, believe it or not. This is kind of a high-grade, rare date or scarce date. It just happens to have a hole. And in today's market, that's a kiss of death. People don't even recognize or care that it's a rare date. Not rare, I'd say scarce date. And aside from the hole, pretty good, but it just doesn't raise eyebrows. Nobody thinks it's 67 Hermosillo. And the thing about 67, I'll digress a bit, it's a very interesting mint. There's only 2 dates that I know of. They didn't do a 68, I don't think. So they did a 62 and a 67. But the 67's got so many varieties. So many varieties, you almost have to look at high-grade examples in order to tell what they are for sure. But in the 67, I think the harder ones to get are the ones that aren't the overdates. Very interesting mint to collect. And the 67, just to throw in an extra aside, the 1867 Hermosillo half reals, I think, from my experience, are far scarcer than the 1867 Hermosillo 1 reals. Just don't see them as often. But still, when you reach the point where beautiful additions to your high-grade collection no longer come in on a regular basis, and all you start to see are low-grade examples, the natural reaction is you start to lose interest. You're not getting those braggable moments anymore. You're starting to deal with average quality coins, and you go on to another series. So, meanwhile, while I was going on to other series, I continued to collect data in my survey for half reals. And the purpose was that, yeah, I knew pretty much what was available out in these 2 columns, the AU-BU, but I wanted to find out what is scarce, very scarce, rare, very rare, extremely rare. Now, here is the quirk in the market today. The catalogs don't really give you a very good indication of what, they give you a good indication generally of what's rare, what's extremely rare, what's very rare, but they give you no indication or a blurry indication of what is scarce and very scarce. So you wonder, why is it that coins go from being, in the $20, $50 price range up to $500 and $1,000? It's because very few people know what's in between. And that's an area of great opportunity, is the scarce and rare coins. So I gathered all of this data, trying to find out what are the grade rarities, like for a 35, for example. If I'd ever get anything better than fine, if it was a reasonable price, I'd buy it, because some dates are just very, very difficult to get in high grade. So I gathered this research data, and it helped to reawaken my interest in the series, as you could tell if you were listening to the tone of my voice as I started talking about rarities and unrecognized opportunities in the marketplace. So research, getting to be a specialist in half reals, has a benefit for you because it helps you to appreciate what the rarities are rather than just having to take somebody else's word for it. There's a lot of hidden rarities. Here is something very interesting. From my observations, half of all of the half reals are fine or worse. But yet there's that paradox that a high proportion are also AU, BU. So what it really says is if you get a VF or an XF coin in a lot of these dates, that's probably the best you're going to get because they circulated hard. They were either buried in the wall or in the ground and they survived in BU, or they circulated the heck out of them because it was the poor man's coin. So keep in mind that half of all of the examples that are available in the market are low-grade examples. And another thing about mintage, no coin has a published mintage except for the book that Mr. Bussey just put out. And you only put mintages of about 5 or 6 Guanajuatos, right?
That's correct.
So it's interesting getting insight where figures are available if you search them out. But in general, there's no published mintages on half reals. So I started to do analysis on what I figured the relative mintages were, and I came to the conclusion it would have to be, on average, they would be lower production than what you see in the Republic the Republic 5 centavos, where a lot of dates have mintages. And the reason they would be lower on average is because for the half reals, Guanajuato and Zacatecas are very common, or they had high production. Whereas in the half real series, Guanajuato and Zacatecas, for some strange reason, are relatively scarce issues. And that, took me by surprise, because you always think that a Guanajuato or Zacatecas minor is going to be pretty commonly available, but for half reals, that's just not the case. And it doesn't become apparent to you unless you do a little bit of research. So as a result, you can, when I studied the population of what I was seeing on the marketplace, it gave me the capability to say, when I get a coin that fine is the best I've seen, or maybe very fine, it allows you to really appreciate these grade rarities more, especially when it becomes apparent that better examples aren't really available on the market. Now, only God can look down into everybody's collection and know what's there. And we've seen wonder coins come up, a few Chihuahua, half reals, and 1 real, right? Came up in AU, BU. Nobody knew they existed. Came up on an auction about a decade ago. So wonder coins do come up that nobody thinks exist, but it doesn't happen very often. So if research indicates that there's nothing better than fine or very fine, and despite your ego of wanting a high-grade collection, I'd recommend you go ahead and purchase the grade rarities, because that's what they are. There's a lot of them in this series, because keep in mind, only 135 out of 387 have been slabbed in MS grades. So we covered this. Surprisingly few examples of Guanajuato and Zacatecas mints exist. I suspect that it was probably because they were privately owned, and it probably cost more. It cost just as much to produce a half real as it did a 1 real or 8 real, and they only produced as few as the government would force them to produce. However, they were both very generous in their production of 1 reals. So I got back into the saddle. I was collecting half reals again, concentrating on rarity. And I got a couple of really highly rare coins. This is a 1862 Hermosillo. I'm sure there's a few better examples, but anybody who gets one is a lucky guy. Here's a 1833 Durango RL. And as far as I can tell, the RL mint, I think, there wasn't a man in Mexico with an assayer in Mexico with the RL initial. They were probably produced in Paris, right, as samples? Because every time they had a coin produced in Durango, it had the RM over L. We'll get into that when we talk about varieties. But you get a lot of pride of ownership when you start to accumulate these rarities. And what gives you more pride of ownership is when you got a rarity and it doesn't just jump out and say, I'm a rarity. It doesn't jump out saying, I'm a grade rarity. You know it's a rarity because of work you did, or because of the network of collectors you've got, and they tell you, hey, that's a real cherry. But rare coins are rare coins. And if rare coins are what's pushing your button, ultimately you're going to hit the wall. Because you acquire rare coins so infrequently, because they're rare and everybody else is looking for them, that you're not getting that reinforcement that drives a lot of collectors. So discouragement sets in again. You, again, me, and probably a lot of other people, drift on to other series. Don't stop collecting Mexican coins, but we just go on to something where we get that positive reinforcement. Now, I have to confess again, this isn't my coin. It's a nice coin, and I wanted to put it up here just so we could talk about errors in half reals. They are, depending on how you classify an error, this is a double strike. If you figure an error is an off-center, then they're real common. But double strikes and other major errors are extremely rare, very sought after, very expensive. So if this is what you like, you're not going to get many acquisitions. But if you do get an acquisition that's an error, you're a lucky collector. Because like I say, very, very seldom do they occur. Make sure if you get one that you get a pedigree on it, because I imagine if the Chinese ever got a hold of the fact that people pay big premiums for this stuff, they could crank out all sorts of errors and they'd probably look real convincing. So a pedigree would help if you got a error coin, prior auctions that it was in, prior collectors who owned it. So what really is driving me now in my zeal for half real collecting is I'm falling in love with the series again because of varieties. And variety collecting really gives you that relatively frequent thrill of discovery. The problem with a lot of catalogs is they're pretty diligent in listing overdates, but they're pretty weak in listing other types of varieties. So most of these you won't even know they exist unless you go out looking for them. So in this case, you know, you got a very interesting overdate in Culiacan 1853 because it's so apparent. They didn't make any attempt at all to erase that one before they stamped the 3 over it. So those kind of overdates to me, even though in 1853, I don't know of an example that's not an overdate. They're all overdates, so they probably only had one die. But it's still a very interesting coin to collect because when you get that type of overdate where they just didn't care that you could see other stuff underneath it, that's kind of cool. This next one on the side is a 69 Culiacan. That's large enough for almost anybody to see. That's a 1/2 next to another 1/2 for the denomination. And as far as I know, that's not in the book either. So you could go to a big show like this where there's a lot of coins, and you got a pretty good opportunity to snag varieties that the seller doesn't know about, that might not even be in the catalog. Won't make you a fortune, I gotta admit. Variety collecting probably won't make you a fortune because it's not as popular as rarity, but it gives you that thrill of discovery, which to me is a very exciting thing. I'm going to go through a lot of the more exciting varieties. I didn't want to totally exhaust it for you because I want there to be some thrill of discovery on your part as you go into collecting half reals, but I'll give you enough of a glimpse to show you just how cool this series is. Now, Durango needs a story to it. Durango in 1832, or 1832, they got Paris dyes. And as far as I can see, those dyes were completely made in Paris. They already had the RL assayer struck. Every single one, I don't show it on here, every single one has RM over RL. They didn't, so they always used those Paris-made dyes. And they were very, Durango Mint were the early example of master recyclers. They did not want to throw anything away. So they used these dyes, I swear, they used those same dyes for about 15 years. And they probably had a number of them because you see, if you look close, that they're all not the same dye because different features are slightly different. So they had a number of dyes. But man, this one is supposedly an 1841. But the 4 is over a 3. The 1 is over a 3. Who knows what else is going on over here? It looks like the 8's double punch. It's a super exciting mint to collect. The only problem is almost all the time, except for 1834s, they're low grade. So you won't get really, there's almost a paradox. Very seldom will you get both high grade and varieties. You can't get everything. But variety collecting, man, it is very exciting just because it's so underdocumented today. And there's no price differential on almost all of these varieties, not all of them, but a very large part of the varieties. There is no price differential. So you can go out and have all sorts of fun with these, searching for these varieties, and it doesn't cost you anything. This one is an example of how the depths to which the Durango did. You can't even tell what that date is because they messed with the 8. They had it too far over here at one point and they double punched it. Then you got the 4 over a 3 there. I think that's a 6 over a 2, possibly over a 1. But like I say, you get a lot of fun just looking at these and trying to figure out what they are. It's, I can't overestimate that. Sorry if I'm overusing the words cool and fun, but hey, I drank the Kool-Aid. I'm excited about these. So here's another example from Durango. Now, notice that right here, probably what happened was the O superscript on Durango, because of those dye reuse, it probably just eroded away or filled in. But they say they would call this a D, and then others in that year would be DO. I'm not sure. I'd say, yeah, it's a D because the O has been totally obliterated, but I don't think they were even striking the mint marks on these dyes. They were all originally struck when they got those dyes in, and they just kept reusing them and reusing them. Again, you can see the 4 over the 3, the 8's canted a little bit, and it's over something over here. You got a 3, they tried to obliterate the date, and who knows what it's over. But it's just, so much fun to look at the, oh, here's another feature. See this right here? That is a 1/2 over an 8. The 8 occupies the whole thing. Keep that in mind because we're going to talk about that as something to watch out for. And the reason is it appears on almost every single date. From this point forward, almost every Durango date has a 1/2 over an 8. And a lot of times you go look at a coin and it'll say error, 1/2 over 8. But they don't tell you everyone from that date has that. And almost every Durango coin for the whole decade has that. They're very interesting, but it's really not a variety if every coin from that date has that feature. So here is, man, I'll tell you what. You can tell that's a 45, but what's interesting is they made that 5. That's not a stamp. That is a bar there. They put another bar there. They put a 0 there and tried to obliterate it. It looks like it's over a D. Over here, you got a different die. Again, 1845. But that doesn't look like a 4. Doesn't even look like a 3. That looks like a 5 over a 3. But again, you can see both of them are still that 1/2 over 8. It occurs through the whole decade of Durango. Here's another example of how bad these things get. I mean, this is actually kind of laughable. I think it's a 50 or 43, could be a 48. It's a 48, 48. Now, look at how the date has been redone so much. You can still see the tail of the 3 over there. So almost all these are still over the original dies that came in with 1833 RL stamped on them. Now, in 49, 50, 51, and 52, the assayer changed to JMR. Isn't it interesting? On this particular variety, you basically have, as far as I can tell, JRM. I don't know why, but it sure looks like that to me. Again, very interesting variety. Here is a pretty rare date. And I believe all of the ones from this dam have this feature, so I don't know that I'd call it a variety. It's interesting. It's an O over an O. And what's weird is they had the first O in the right position. Why did they stamp that second O in the wrong position? But, you know, they went with it. So it's a kind of a bad placed O over a good placed O. I don't know if this was, what this probably was, because it almost looks like an 8 over 7. I don't believe it is. What it probably is they stamped the 8 too high, and they re-stamped another 8 over a partially eroded second digit. I believe all of the 52 JMRs have this feature also, but talk about double stamp. Man, that is a real cool coin to own, even though it's a rare coin, and I can't tell you if they're all like this or not, but it's nice to look at something like that, and not only do you get a rare coin, but you also get an interesting feature like that, a massive magic website. And I said, yeah, it's possible for you to collect a BU set of Mexico City half reals, but if 3 or 4 other people decide to do it too, then the prices are going to triple. So there's really not, the term would be float on the market. There's really not a lot of float of excess availability of high-grade coins or rare coins in the half real market at current prices. So too many people jump in and the dynamics are going to change a little bit. Now, Again, it's confession time. This one belongs to Kirk. I wish it belonged to me. Mine's not nearly so photogenic. Mine's like a good to very good. But it's like one of the most interesting coins in the series. Notice the reversed N. I've got a nice story. I was sitting at Mike Dunnigan's table one time, looking through his half reals, and I had my book there, and I was looking at my spreadsheet, and I said, Mike, they got this 1829 with a reversed N. Does that thing actually exist, or is it urban legend? And he says, oh, that doesn't exist. So I was looking through his halves, and about an hour later, I pulled this out, and I said, take a look at that and tell me it doesn't exist. It was an 1829 with a reversed N. And wouldn't you know, when I got back the priced coins, that wasn't in it. So it went into his collection. But I have to tell you one more thing, and I doubt any of us will ever get it, but I know of at least one example of a reversed N on an 1831. I have never seen it except one example, and I don't think I'll ever own it. I suspect it's extremely rare. But that's the kind of fun you can have, because I know for my good to very good that I got on the internet, it's such a small coin, people don't even notice it. I got my reversed N in good to very good for $7.50. And what else have I ever bought in my whole life for $7.50 that I can stand in front of a group of 20 people or whatever and brag to you about it and still be super charged up? I mean, this is the kind of fun you can have with variety collecting, because there's discoveries to be made, and a lot of times it doesn't cost you very much to do it. Now, of everything in my presentation, these next few slides are the most interesting, because I don't think anybody's ever talked about it. And this is what I call a variety that occurs in questionably in 1830, 31, and 32. I call it the II variety. REPUBIICA. I wouldn't classify this 1830 as an II variety, because what you've really got there is a very small L that started to erode. But I will show you proof positive that the person who was engraving dies in Guanajuato those years was demonstrably 100% an illiterate person. Because I'll show you how this regressed from an eroded LI to a true II, and he thought that's the way you spell Republica. Now, yes?
Now, if you look at the star on the reverse, 620, normally you expect 5. You see that on Catholic schools from time to time.
You have just proven my point. How fun it is to notice things like that. And you know what? You don't have to really look through a book of half reals or a box of half reals in order to find numerous discoveries like that. They're there to be had, and like I say, it doesn't cost much. So when this die wore out, and you can see it's already on its last leg. You had erosion over here into the rim. You had erosion of the P into the rim. They had double struck that P, so it was on its last leg. They gave it to somebody to re-engrave. Here's the 1830 die, and he read that, and here's what he created. He created an LI. Again, it was the same type of very small L that was eroded in 1831. So we can see 1831 has a true LI die. And this is the way they were replicating it. We can see it's not the same die because of the snake's alignments to the letters. Those are different dies. So it was one was wearing out and used as an example to create a new one. Now, when that die wore out, again, they went through the same process. This die wore out, had to produce another one. And to this guy now, that eroded L looked like an I. A true II. And you can tell a true II variety because of the alignment of the two I's. They have to be parallel. This guy, luckily, he didn't cant that at all. He made them perfectly parallel. To him, that's the way you spelled Republica, which to me is proof positive that the person didn't know how to spell. He may have been a good engraver by copying, but you copy a bad die over and over, and ultimately, if you got somebody who doesn't know how to spell, you end up with a very hard to believe error. And a lot of people don't even know that this error exists. It's what I consider one of the major varieties of Guanajuato. Now, that's 1831. It also persisted into 1832. You got this 1831 die. You've got this one that's found in 1832. We can tell they're not the same die because the snake lines up with the B there, it lines up with the I. So the guy was taking these worn out dies and continuing to replicate them in the next year. It wasn't like they took the bad die from 31 and you reused it in 32. They had no quality control. They were, which I'm very grateful. Thank you, sir, for never learning how to spell and somehow landing a job as an engraver for a mint. But it makes collecting half reals very exciting. Now you can see later in 1832, somebody who knew how to spell caught that error because they were going to make sure that that problem could never exist again. They made that L a true L. It wasn't the small one. They got a different punch. And in subsequent years, that II variety never surfaced again. So it was a situation where they caught the problem and then corrected it. This, by the way, Guanajuato, early years, probably 1847 and prior, very, very difficult to get in high grade. If you can get high-grade examples of early Guanajuato half reals, go out to the NGC population survey and just validate it. But my experience is anytime you can get a nice, even this, it's probably what, VF to XF, but it is a beautiful example of an early Guanajuato, even though it's only VF XF. In 1833, Guanajuato, which by the way is my favorite mint in half reals because they screw it up so often. You've got rounded letters for the threes and then flat top threes. And the same thing occurs in 1833 Guanajuato 1 reals. And in both of those, the 1 real and the half real, the flat top threes are, I would categorize them as rare varieties. And on these you'd have to probably pay a premium because it's well known that the flat top threes are hard to come by. Now, luckily, this is my coin. Other collectors were asleep at the wheel when it came up a few years ago on eBay, but this is one of my prizes in my half real collection. 10G, or 10D, 0G. They totally left off the 2. And from what I know of, this is the only coin in all of the Mexico City reals, including the 8s, where they did that. And it's a very rare coin. I haven't seen one example. I believe it's in the catalog, though, so there has to be other examples around for you all to find. In 1835, Guanajuato, man, they threw out the book on quality control. Apparently they knew they were going to get the Soho dies, and they were just trying to reuse all of the old dies they had. Because if you can even get an 1835 where you can see the whole date, it's a coin to buy. And it's 35 Guanajuato is, I would say, a very scarce coin to begin with. In this case, you can see the 5, but you got to look close. And here, it's a transition year. So you can see the old cap, the Mexican eagle, and here's another example of 1835. Look how that's a homemade 5. That's pieced together. That's not even a real 5. But this has the cap you normally see with Soho dies. That has the Soho eagle. So in 35, you can get both styles of caps and eagles. It's possible, I believe, I will bet you that it's possible that you could get examples, they'd be out there, of a Soho eagle and a old style cap, or vice versa. I suspect on all years where there's those transition periods in a mint that didn't have good quality control, that a lot of those combinations are possible. So now we're going to see how they transitioned that Soho die into production. Here in 1836 and 37, we can see that in 1836, it looks like all those are Mexican punches. They're all broad. You can see that they didn't punch everything in a perfect arc. And then when you get to 1837, you've got finer quality punches. Everything's in a perfect arc. So at this point in time, they're starting to get good quality control, very good quality control from the periods 1837 through the early 1840s. You had about 4 or 5 years where there's almost no varieties, except for this guy. And this one, I think this coin cost me $300. So they're not all cheap. What this is a REPUBLIGA. It's called, I call it a Republiga. But, you know, it's just so outrageous that you got to own it, even if there's a big premium on that particular variety. Now, this one I don't believe is in my collection, but it's something where it pays to look at these coins that are available at big shows with a careful eye, because if you'll see, this cap has rays over a portion of it. To me, that's a pretty interesting variety, and is relatively hard to come by. I don't see hardly any of these, but it's something to watch out for. Here we're getting into cap differences, and Mr. Bussey, I would say, has to be the expert on this. But they're basically transitions of die styles. Here you got an 1840 MOML. Unless you're looking, you probably would miss this. But to me, when you get a difference in caps or a difference in eagles in a year, that's a big thing. It's really very interesting. Wide cap and a conical cap that's a little bit smaller at the base. But you have to be looking for things like that. It's not going to jump out at you. It's best to look through a large number of coins, because then it kind of jumps out at you if you're paying attention to detail. Here we get to my favorite mint again, Guanajuato, 1831. In addition to having the II stuff going for it and that extremely rare reversed N, you get a difference in caps. Same date, same assayer, but for some reason, half of them or so have the large cap and some have the small cap. And you also notice the difference in letter quality and placement. So they definitely had multiple engravers at that mint in that period. We get back to the 45 1845 GA. And here again you get differences in caps in the same dam. When you get that, to me, it's very interesting. So this coin that I said was kind of boring previously, I was just spoofing you. If you're a variety collector, it's real exciting. If you are a grade collector and you're just looking for an oh wow collection, you might pass that by. Now, this kind of stumps me. In 28G Guanajuato, you've got the MJ and the MR. And they screwed up my fun because all the time for the MJ, every single example I saw had a small cap. For the MR, every single example had the large cap. You also have a difference in the placement of the superscripts. You notice that the G has a superscript over it for the MJ, and for the MR it doesn't. And unfortunately, they were consistent. As far as I can tell, I haven't found one that differs yet, but it keeps me looking because I know that this is an area where there's probably varieties, and someday I'm going to find them. I'm going to find an MR with a small cap, or I'm going to find an MJ that's missing that superscript. So you get these things that you know there just has to be gold in that river. I'm just going to keep panning for it till I find it. You can always recognize the Soho cap because it's basically a triangle. This is a more traditional Mexican cap, and in 1843 you had a style transition, and luckily you had the same assayer and you had different caps and different eagles all in the same year, and that's exciting. And then again, what you look for is not only the different eagle, different cap, but you also look for different combinations where they had the new eagle but the old cap. And you don't find that very frequently, but it's something that I always look for. In 1835, I already talked about the 35s, but this just shows you the transition in eagles that occurred in 1835 in Geo. And then you had another transition for Guanajuato in 1843 where they had the old Soho eagle and they switched to the Mexican eagle. And whew, talk about short. They switched to the Mexican eagle in 1843, and then in 1844 they switched to the Guanajuato eagle. So, and this is, to me, if you can ever get one of these Guanajuato eagles in with basically 1844 to 1854, I think, and you can get it in high grade, man, that's a beautiful eagle. Very well engraved, especially if you can get it fully struck up. The difference here is it's a really wide breast. The feather detail on the breast is different than it is for the Mexican eagle, and the neck is a bit shorter. Now, I'm seeing stars, because stars are another thing to watch out for, but they're not nearly so inconsistent as a lot of people would lead you to believe. This is basically a summary of stars and how they appear through the mints. So Culiacan was consistent through 57. Then it was almost, we have star, one year we don't have star the next, we have star the next, we don't have it. And to me, it almost seemed like what they were doing was experimenting with a counterfeit detection mechanism, where the counterfeiters may not know which years the star should be, and if one had a star, they'd say that's a counterfeit. That's the only reason I can come up with for why in some of these mints they have intermittent placement. But Guanajuato, they were actually pretty consistent in the star department because they had stars through 44. In 1844, you've got a star and a no star variety. Then they had stars during the period when they were doing the Guanajuato Eagle, and after that, or no stars, and then after they switched back to the Mexican Eagle, everything has stars through the end of the series for Guanajuato. Hermosillo, there's only a 2-year production. 62 has stars, 67 doesn't. I doubt you'd ever find a variety for those where they didn't have a star when they should have, or vice versa. Mexico City, every year consistently is the same. They're always the same in terms of stars and superscripts. If you ever find one that varies from it, it's a real find. Here's an example of a real find. 1841, Mexico City, 1 star, 2 stars. That's just a super variety, but I think that you'll pay for the pleasure of owning that. It's well known. Potosi, 31 was a star and no star year. After that, everything consistently has stars. Zacatecas, very consistent. Stars every year. Die-States, I don't believe that Die-State is a variety, but it just shows you the difference of what you might encounter. 1860, Guadalajara, very common year in high grade. You're starting to get rusty die here, but you can still read the whole Libertad. Here, rust on that die goes through about half the face of that coin. Which one's worth more? To me, where you get a choice, go with the better one. The rusty die, unless it's got some interesting feature, probably ought to go at a slight discount, even if it's in BU. Now, we get to your payoff for sitting and listening to my speech. I have created a spreadsheet which I will email to any of you who want it for you to record your collection. And to me, it's a useful tool, because as you saw in the earlier slide, if I have a coin in a particular grade, I will color that cell orange, and then if I do that for my whole collection and I page through my spreadsheet, you can actually see patterns. And what it tells you is availability of high-grade coins if you're choosing to get high-grade coins. Because if you got high grades and then all of a sudden for some years it starts to dip, it means, shoot, you don't even have to study it that close. You can just look at the patterns and say, hey, for this year, 42, as an example, if I see a AU, I'm going to jump all over it. It just gives you a rapid way of processing all the data that you're having to deal with at a show. And with me, I put it on a spreadsheet on my computer, and then when I go to a show, I email it to myself, and I pull it up on my cell phone, and I've got the spreadsheet on my cell phone to use at a show. And I have my whole collection on my cell phone, basically. So anybody who's interested in this, come up, get my card. It gives my email ID, and email me a request. I made a mistake last year of having people come up and give me their email IDs, and half of them I couldn't even read. So this year, you're going to have to email me, and then I'll send it to you. Now, we get to the buyer beware, your second payoff. You got to keep in mind, yeah, buyer beware, but in effect, most varieties don't command a premium. But it's like, if you think you're getting a variety and it turns out everything that year has that feature, you get a little disappointed. So one of the things is, on Zacatecas and a lot of those other mints that don't have superscripts, a lot of times dealers will say, no, on their 2x2, no superscript, error. But they probably don't even know every single date doesn't have a superscript. So if you aren't an experienced buyer, you might buy that coin expecting that it's a nice error, and then when you study, you find out, well, your hopes were dashed. Another is they'll say no star, error. And they don't tell you, or they probably don't know, that every single coin that year from that mint doesn't have a star. So you have to take these variety attributions that some of the dealers might put on with a grain of salt. Pull up your spreadsheet, check what you've seen, and then you'll be able to tell whether to ignore this stuff or not. Rarity misattributions, it's just never gonna end. You know, no matter how much everybody talks. The trouble is people don't know what's rare. They probably know what's very rare. There's a blurry line between rare and very scarce. There's a blurry line between very scarce and scarce. There's a blurry line between scarce and uncommon. So it's natural that someone who has a coin and is excited about it might say it's rare. But take those rarity attributions you see on the 2x2s with a grain of salt also. Here's what really hacks me off, because it raised my hopes. You know, from 1860, Zacatecas, 1860 through at least 1863, every single coin that I have ever seen has an inverted A that's used for the V in the VL assayer. But yet, almost every time I see a coin, they say inverted A for a V, you know, making you think this is a scarce variety. But yet, you show me one that's got a real V instead of an inverted V, and that's the one I'd get excited about, but I doubt it exists. I'd say that those coins were probably hubbed at the time, and that's just the way they were done. Here's the deal. A lot of dealers who don't know, or sellers who don't know, will say 1/2/8 for the denomination, but in 1840s for Durango, everything's that way. Totally ignore that. Then you got mislabeled Durango dates. It doesn't make too much difference, really, because most of them are low grade. Unless you're paying a real big premium for a date, it's going to be natural. Some are going to be mislabeled. It's probably more of an opportunity than a danger, because all you got to do is take out the loop and look, and then compare them to pictures you might have, or ask other collectors, what is this? Snap a picture of the date, send it to a collector friend, say, what do you think it is? They say it's an 1846, and get other people's opinion, but it's a very common problem. Mislabeled overdates, man, you know, it creates a lot of phantom varieties, and I think probably about 5% of all of the varieties in the catalog don't exist, but yet they'll never get cleared, even by me, because I can't say for sure they don't exist. But everyone goes chasing. It's like poor Scott there. He gives me his list of what he needs for the 5 centavo restyled Eagles, and I tell him, you're chasing ghosts. Most of those don't exist. I've never seen one. But these collectors are chasing ghosts all the time because they've got all of these over-assayers that are listed. And, you know, unless you got a really sharp BU coin, you can't prove it one way or the other. Mislabeled overdates, it's mainly a problem in situations where they had excessive reuse of dyes like Durango. Maybe Guanajuato in the depths of their lack of quality control days. No, you kind of take those, you kind of take the buyer beware and you flip it around and you got the same thing. All those buyer bewares are opportunities because the same thing's in reverse. Slabbed coins hardly ever list the variety. So the dealer has that slab, they look at the number on the slab, they might look at the date, And then that's it. Once it's slabbed, almost nobody looks for varieties, and there's a lot of varieties in those slabbed coins. So I would say if you're looking to really score some fun discoveries, the first thing you do is go look at the slabbed coins, because like I say, human nature is such that once you get them slabbed, you think there's no more discovery, but there is. Huge opportunity there. You won't make a lot of money, but you'll have a lot of fun. Especially when you say to a dealer, hey, look, this thing was 1845, and I found, you know, this or that on it. And then you might say, okay, so what? Keep looking. But many raw coins, and I'd say the vast majority of them, aren't attributed for variety. A lot of opportunity if you're a variety collector. A lot of varieties, because there can be so many, aren't listed in publications. Most people don't know about, in half reals, Guanajuato and Zacatecas mints are actually kind of hard to get. And if you're talking about Zacatecas from about, and Guanajuato from about 1848, 1850 upward, real easy to get a lot of them in BU or AU, but previous to that in both mints, they're kind of hard. And the market's kind of hip to that now. With population surveys easily available to anybody on their cell phone for free, a lot of people and dealers understand what grade rarity is when they look at the population, and a lot of times early Guanajuato and Zacatecas in high grade will command a bit of a premium, maybe 50 or 100 bucks over what other dates would. But to me, that's still worth getting, because they're a lot harder to get in high grade than Mexico City. Grade rarity, man, you talk about wilderness that's totally unexplored. Even to this date, I would say grade rarity is your greatest opportunity. And the reason is everybody is so fixated on whether it's MS63 or 64, or whether it's details or not, that nobody is looking at any of the rest of the coins. And nobody's keeping track of whether an XF is actually a hit out of the ballpark find or not. So, lot of opportunities in that, and I don't know that you'll ever live long enough to profit from that, but at least when you talk to one of your oh wow collectors who only buys BU coins, you'll be able to say, yeah, but do you have this date? And hey, this is XF, it looks pretty good, but I'll bet you don't have one. So you can score a few pleasure points out of it. There's and another thing that's in that wilderness are knowledge of what is scarce and what's very scarce. Like I say, the market pretty much knows what's rare, very rare, exceedingly rare. They pretty much know what's common, but almost nobody knows what is for certain, what's scarce, what's very scarce, and you hardly ever pay a premium for scarce coins in today's market. It's really like stealing candy from a baby. And with that, I'd like to take questions. And also, before you go, come up, get my card, send me an email, and I'll shoot you off a copy of the I'll shoot you off a copy of my spreadsheet for you to start recording your collection. Having it available when you're at a show, it's fun for me. Any questions? Yes?
Have you found reading for a gold coin on a half real?
Reading for what?
A gold coin.
No, that would be a hit out of the ballpark thing. But you know what? There is a possibility, because everything being in 2x2s, or the old slabs that didn't show the edge, there's almost nobody who looks for that. But I doubt that it exists. And you'd need a high-grade example. But if you'd find one, that would be a very, very exciting coin. What you do find in half reals and 1 reals periodically is mainly 1 reals, is sometimes they'll use the half real eagle on the 1 real, but you got to be real diligent and keep an eye out for that. Sometimes they'll use the half real punches on the 1 real, so you'll have 1841 and it'll be a micro 1, stuff like that. But the reading, I don't think. I think that my guess is they probably paid real close attention to that because it was a fraud detection feature. And they probably didn't let silver coins go through that gold edge device. Any other questions?
The second question is, starting to acquire half reals to complement half excudos. Has there ever been any work to match up the obverse or eagle side of the coin between half reals and excudos?
When you crank out the book, I'll buy a copy.
Okay.
There hasn't been one, and you'd probably find instances, especially in those mints where quality control was real bad. I think they did a lot of recycling of components, and they would have reused design features for one denomination if they were in current need of it. Anything else? If not, be sure to get a card and send me an email and I'll shoot you off a copy.